I still remember the weight of that night 15 years ago, the way the rain hammered against my windows like an omen I was too naive to understand. It was past midnight when I heard the knock, soft at first, then desperate. I threw on my robe and stumbled to the door, my heart already racing with the kind of dread that comes from knowing, somehow, that your life is about to change forever. When I opened that door, I found him. Ethan. Just 5 years old, shivering in clothes too thin for the October chill, his lips tinged blue, his small body trembling. Next to him sat a worn canvas bag and a crumpled envelope with my name scrawled across it in handwriting. I recognized instantly. My sister's handwriting. I dropped to my knees, pulling the child into my arms. He was burning up with fever, his skin hot enough to sear through my nightgown. With shaking hands, I tore open the envelope. The letter inside was brief, brutally so, written in Chloe's hasty scrawl. Sarah, the kid has a terminal illness. 6 months, tops. I can't watch my own child die slowly. Marcus and I are starting over somewhere new. Don't try to find us. As far as we're concerned, Ethan doesn't exist anymore. I read those words 3 times before they sank in. My sister, my only sibling, had abandoned her dying child on my doorstep like he was garbage. No phone call, no discussion. Just a sick little boy and a death sentence. I didn't waste time being shocked. I grabbed my keys, wrapped Ethan in every blanket I could find, and drove like a demon to County General. The emergency room doctor took one look at him and called for immediate tests. By dawn, we had a diagnosis that was both terrifying and, impossibly, hopeful. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Aggressive. Deadly if left untreated, but treatable. With intensive chemotherapy, bone marrow transplants, and a fighting chance, this child could live. 6 months, Chloe had written. 6 months was the timeline if Ethan received no treatment at all. My sister had been told her son could be saved, and she had chosen to walk away rather than face the hard road ahead. I made a decision that night that would define the next 15 years of my life. I would save him, whatever it took. The first year was a descent into a hell I hadn't known existed. I was 30 years old, an elementary school teacher making $42,000 a year before taxes, suddenly responsible for a critically ill child whose first round of treatment alone cost more than I made annually. The hospital's financial counselor sat across from me in her cramped office, her expression sympathetic but businesslike as she laid out the numbers. The first 6 months of intensive chemotherapy will run approximately $250,000, she said, sliding a cost breakdown across the desk. That's with insurance covering 60%. Your portion will be roughly $100,000. I stared at the paper, my vision blurring. $100,000. I had $8,000 in my savings account. There are payment plans, she continued. Charity programs. You can apply for assistance. I applied for everything. I filled out forms until my hands cramped, told our story to strangers until my voice went hoarse. Some programs helped, most didn't. The bills kept coming, an avalanche of paper with numbers that made my stomach turn. I sold my car first, a reliable Toyota I'd saved 3 years to buy. I got $6,000 for it and bought a 15-year-old Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it for $1,200. The difference went to the hospital. I canceled my gym membership, my Netflix subscription, every small luxury I'd allowed myself. I stopped buying coffee, started making my lunch instead of eating in the cafeteria at school. I moved back into my childhood home with my parents, who were both in their mid-70s, to save the $900 a month I'd been paying in rent. My mother cried when I told her about Chloe, about what she'd done. My father didn't cry. He just sat in his recliner, his face gray with shock and betrayal. He'd given Chloe money over the years, helped her and Marcus start their various business ventures. To learn she'd abandoned her own child this way destroyed something in him, but they rallied. They loved Ethan immediately, fiercely. My mother stayed with him during the day when I was at work, singing him songs, reading him stories, holding a bucket when the chemo made him violently sick. My father built a small library of children's books by Ethan's bedside, spent hours sitting with him in comfortable silence. The treatment was brutal. I watched this small boy, barely more than a baby, endure things that would break most adults. The chemotherapy made him so sick he couldn't keep down water. His hair fell out in clumps. He developed sores in his mouth that made eating agony. There were days when he begged me to make it stop, when he cried that he just wanted to die so the pain would end. Those were the nights I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed until I couldn't breathe, terrified that Chloe had been right, that all this suffering was for nothing, that he would die anyway and I would have put him through hell for no reason. But he didn't die. He fought. God, how he fought. Between treatments, when he had enough energy, he asked questions. Where was his mommy? When was she coming back? Did she not love him anymore? What had he done wrong? I learned to lie with a smile on my face. Your mommy had to go away for work, sweetie. But I'm here. I'll always be here. Eventually, the questions stopped. Eventually, he stopped mentioning Chloe at all. By the time he was 7, he was calling me Mom. The financial strain never eased. By the end of the first year, I was $120,000 in debt. I took on tutoring jobs in the evenings, graded papers until 2 in the morning, sold everything I owned that had any value. My engagement ring from a relationship that had ended 3 years before Ethan arrived went to a pawn shop for $800. The antique dresser my grandmother had left me sold for $1,500. I ate ramen and rice, wore clothes from Goodwill, and put every spare penny toward the medical bills. At school, my colleagues noticed. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, called me into her office one afternoon during my planning period. She was a stern woman in her 60s, but her eyes were kind as she gestured for me to sit. Sarah, we're worried about you, she said gently. You look exhausted. You've lost weight. The other teachers say you're falling asleep in the break room. I'm fine, I lied. Just busy. She pushed a manila envelope across her desk. The faculty took up a collection. It's not much, but we want to help. Inside was $3,000 in checks and cash. I broke down crying right there in her office, overwhelmed by the kindness of people who barely knew my story. Mrs. Rodriguez came around her desk and hugged me while I sobbed. That boy is lucky to have you, she whispered. Don't you ever forget that. The money helped, but it was a drop in an ocean of debt. I took out a second mortgage on my parents' house, forging their signatures because I knew they would refuse if I asked. The guilt of that deception ate at me, but I was desperate. I maxed out 3 credit cards. I borrowed money from friends and promised to pay it back, knowing I might never be able to. Ethan went into remission after 18 months of treatment. The day doctor, Patel, called me into his office and told me the cancer was undetectable. I collapsed in the chair and cried so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Ethan, sitting beside me in his too large hospital gown, his bald head still bearing the marks of recent tests, reached over and patted my hand. It's okay, Mom, he said in his small, serious voice. I'm going to be okay now. But childhood leukemia is a treacherous disease. 6 months later, it came back. The relapse hit harder than the original diagnosis because I dared to hope, dared to believe we were safe. This time, they recommended a bone marrow transplant. I was tested first, not a match. My parents were too old to be donors. We needed to find a match through the registry, which could take months, and Ethan didn't have months. The cancer was aggressive this time, moving faster. In desperation, I hired a private investigator to find Chloe. If she wouldn't help her son while he was dying, maybe she could at least be tested as a donor. It took the investigator 3 weeks and cost me $2,000 I didn't have. He found her in Santa Barbara, California, living in a expensive condo with Marcus. I called the number he gave me, my hands shaking. Chloe answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and carefree. Music played in the background, the sound of a party. Hello? Chloe, it's Sarah. Silence. Then, coldly, how did you get this number? Your son is dying, I said, my voice breaking. The leukemia came back. He needs a bone marrow transplant. You're his best chance for a match. Please, I'm begging you, just get tested. That's not my problem anymore, she said flatly. I told you, Sarah. I walked away. Whatever happens to that kid is on you now. He's 7 years old, Chloe. He's your son. I don't have a son, she said, and hung up. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone, and something inside me turned to ice. This woman who shared my blood was capable of letting her own child die rather than endure the minor inconvenience of a cheek swab. I had known she was selfish, but this level of cruelty was beyond anything I'd imagined. We got lucky. A match was found through the registry, a 32-year-old woman in Oregon who didn't hesitate to donate. The transplant was successful, but the recovery was long and painful. Ethan spent 4 months in the hospital, his immune system completely destroyed, vulnerable to every infection. I practically lived in his hospital room, sleeping in the chair by his bed, eating vending machine food, missing so much work that I nearly lost my job. Mrs. Rodriguez saved me again, convincing the school board to grant me extended medical leave. My colleagues covered my classes, sent cards and care packages, proved that sometimes family is the people who choose to stand by you, not the ones who share your DNA. By the time Ethan was 10, the medical debt had ballooned to over $300,000. The hospital put a lien on my parents' house. Collections agencies called daily, their voices cold and threatening. My credit score was destroyed. I couldn't qualify for a new credit card, couldn't get a car loan, couldn't even open a checking account at some banks. But Ethan was alive. He was cancer-free. And when I looked at him, growing stronger every day, getting taller, his hair growing back thick and dark, I knew I would do it all again without hesitation. My parents' health began to fail when Ethan was 15. My father had a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. My mother developed early-onset dementia. Suddenly, I was caring for 3 people, working full-time, and still drowning in debt. There were days when I didn't know how I was going to survive the next hour, let alone the next week. Ethan saw it all. He was old enough by then to understand what I was sacrificing, what I had given up for him. He became serious, focused, driven by a determination that seemed too intense for a teenager. "I'm going to be a doctor," he told me one night when he was 16. We were sitting at the kitchen table, me grading papers while he did homework. "I'm going to be an oncologist. I'm going to help kids like me." I looked up at this boy, this young man really, who'd spent more of his childhood in hospitals than playgrounds, and my heart swelled with pride so intense it physically hurt. "You'll be an amazing doctor," I said, "and I'm going to pay you back," he continued, his dark eyes serious. "Every penny you spent on me, every sacrifice you made. I'm going to make sure you never have to worry about money again. Ethan, you don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "You gave me life. Twice. First when you saved me, and again when you loved me. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it wasn't for nothing." He kept his word. He worked harder than any student I'd ever seen, graduating high school as valedictorian with a full scholarship to Duke University. He double majored in biology and chemistry, graduated summa cum laude, and got into Johns Hopkins Medical School on a full ride. During his residency at County General, the same hospital where I'd first brought him that desperate night, he lived in a tiny studio apartment and sent me half of every paycheck. "Ethan, you need that money," I protested. "You need it more," he said. "Let me do this, Mom. Please." He specialized in pediatric oncology, driven by his own experience to help children fighting the same battle he'd won. By the time he was 20, he was already gaining a reputation as a brilliant, compassionate doctor who understood his patients in a way most doctors couldn't. He didn't just treat the disease, he treated the fear, the pain, the crushing weight of uncertainty that came with a cancer diagnosis. My parents passed away within 2 months of each other when Ethan was 19. My father went first, a massive heart attack in his sleep. My mother followed, I think, because she couldn't bear to live in a world without him. We buried them together in the family plot, just Ethan and me and a handful of my parents' old friends. Chloe didn't come. She didn't call. She didn't send flowers or a card. She remained a ghost, a painful absence that had stopped surprising me years ago. The house they left was old, built in 1952, with creaking floors and pipes that rattled in the winter. But it was paid off. Finally, the lien released after years of payments. It was filled with memories, good and bad, laughter and tears, the echoes of 3 generations of family. My mother's garden still bloomed in the backyard, roses and lavender and the tomatoes my father had loved to grow. Ethan and I settled into a quiet life there. I continued teaching, now in my mid-40s and comfortable in my career. Ethan worked brutal hours at the hospital but always made time for dinner with me at least twice a week. We were our own little family, built on love and sacrifice and a bond that went deeper than biology. We were happy. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like I could breathe. That lasted exactly 3 weeks after my parents' funeral. I was in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening in October, making chicken parmesan, when the doorbell rang. Not a polite single ring, but an aggressive, repeated buzzing that made me jump and nearly drop the pan I was holding. I set it on the stove, wiped my hands on my apron, and went to answer it, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor with a package. Instead, I found my sister. Chloe stood on my porch looking like she'd stepped out of the pages of Vogue. She wore a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, Louboutin heels that added 4 inches to her height, and enough jewelry to fund a small country. Her hair was styled in complicated waves that screamed expensive salon, her makeup flawless, her nails perfectly manicured. She looked like money, Like success. Like someone who'd never spent a sleepless night worrying about how to pay for groceries. Next to her stood Marcus, equally polished in clothes that reeked of wealth. He wore a tailored suit, Italian leather shoes, and a Rolex that caught the porch light. His tan suggested recent time on a beach somewhere expensive, his teeth unnaturally white against his skin. They looked like people who'd spent 15 years living well while I'd spent 15 years fighting to keep a child alive, working myself into exhaustion, sacrificing everything for a boy they'd thrown away like garbage. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I saw Chloe's eyes sweep over me, taking in my faded jeans from Target, my 10-year-old sweater with a small hole in the sleeve, my bare feet and lack of makeup. I saw the judgment in her gaze, the subtle sneer that said she found me lacking. "Sarah," she said finally, her voice bright and false. "God, you look exactly the same. Still dressing like it's 1995, I see. Some things never change." Marcus laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. His eyes moved past me to take in the house behind me, the peeling paint on the porch, the screen door with its small tier, the worn welcome mat. I could practically see him calculating the house's value and finding it disappointing. "Nice to see you too, Chloe," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "Can a sister visit?" she asked, pushing past me into the entryway without waiting for an invitation. Her perfume, something expensive and overpowering, filled the small space. "It's been so long. We have so much to catch up on." Marcus followed her in, his eyes continuing to assess every detail of the house with the cold precision of someone calculating assets. He ran a finger along the hallway table, checking for dust, and I saw his nose wrinkle slightly. "Where's the kid?" Chloe asked abruptly, turning to face me. "The sick one I left with you. Ethan, right? I assume you found a decent nursing home for him before he died? I hope the funeral wasn't too expensive. I know money's always been tight for you." The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that Ethan was dead, that I'd shipped him off somewhere to die alone, made my hands ball into fists. She'd said it so carelessly, as if she were asking about a pet I'd been watching, not her own son. "He's not dead," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled rage. Chloe blinked. "What?" "Ethan isn't dead. He's alive. He's healthy. He's thriving." I watched the color drain from her face. Marcus's jaw actually dropped. For a long moment they both just stared at me in shock. "That's impossible," Chloe whispered. "The doctor said 6 months. They were very clear. Terminal. Untreatable." "Treatable," I corrected coldly. "With intensive chemotherapy, bone marrow transplant, and years of follow-up care, all of which I provided because you couldn't be bothered." "But the cost," Marcus stammered. "That kind of treatment costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. How could you possibly afford it?" "I couldn't," I said flatly. "I went into debt. Massive debt. I sold everything I owned. I took out loans. I worked 3 jobs. I did whatever I had to do to keep him alive." Chloe's shock was rapidly morphing into something else. I recognized that look from our childhood. It was the same calculating expression she'd worn when she wanted something from our parents, when she was planning how to manipulate a situation to her advantage. Before she could speak, I heard the front door open behind them. Ethan stepped into the house, still in his surgical scrubs from the hospital, his ID badge clearly visible on his chest. "Dr. Ethan Hayes, pediatric oncology." He was tall now, 6'2", with broad shoulders and the confident bearing of someone who saves lives for a living. He looked nothing like the dying child they'd abandoned. He stopped when he saw Chloe and Marcus, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, nobody spoke. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Chloe's designer handbag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with an expensive thud. Marcus actually stumbled backward, his face going pale. "No," Chloe breathed. "That's not possible. You were dying. You were supposed to die." Ethan's expression was cold, controlled, showing none of the emotion I knew must be churning inside him. "I was dying," he said quietly. "But Sarah saved me. She gave up everything to make sure I lived. She's more of a mother to me than you ever were or could be." "But you were so sick," Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly. "The prognosis was terminal. How did she even afford the treatment?" "She sold her car, her jewelry, everything she owned," Ethan said, his voice hard. "She went hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt. She worked herself to exhaustion. She sacrificed her entire life for 15 years to save a child you threw away like garbage." I saw something flicker across Chloe's face. Shame? Guilt? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that familiar calculating look. She laughed, brittle and sharp. "Well," she said, bending to retrieve her purse, her composure returning like a mask sliding back into place. "This is quite the surprise. Look at you, all grown up and playing doctor. How sweet." The condescension in her voice made my teeth grind. Ethan was a brilliant physician, respected by his peers, beloved by his patients. He'd published research papers, given lectures, saved countless lives, and she dismissed it all with that one word. "Sweet." "We're not here for a reunion," Chloe continued, her voice turning businesslike. "We're here about Mom and Dad's will." My stomach dropped. "What?" Marcus pulled a thick folder from the leather briefcase he was carrying. "Your parents left a will. Everything split 50-50 between you and Chloe. This house, their savings, their investments, everything. We want our half, and we want it now." I felt the room spinning. My parents had died 2 months ago, 2 months during which Chloe hadn't called, hadn't visited, hadn't sent so much as a card. I'd planned their funerals alone, sorted through their belongings alone, mourned them alone, and now she wanted half of what they'd left? "You weren't at their funeral," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't call. You didn't even send flowers." "We were traveling," Chloe said dismissively, waving a manicured hand. "We didn't get the message until it was too late. But that's irrelevant. The will is very clear." She pulled documents from the folder and spread them on the hallway table. I recognized my father's signature, my mother's, witnessed and notarized. It was all legal, all official. According to the property assessment, this house is worth approximately $1.8 million, Marcus said, his finger tracing lines on one of the documents. Plus, their savings account, investments, and other assets, the total estate is valued at just over $2.3 million. Your half is $1.15 million. Our half is $1.15 million. The numbers felt unreal. My parents had been frugal, but I'd had no idea they'd accumulated that much. They'd lived so simply, never taking vacations, never buying new cars, always saving, always planning for a future they didn't live long enough to enjoy. "We need to sell this house," Chloe said, her voice hardening. "We need the money. We have debts, Sarah. Serious debts. We're talking millions." "Then get a job," I snapped. "Work for it like normal people." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "It's not that simple. We invested in a tech startup. It failed. The investors are demanding their money back. If we don't pay them, we're looking at fraud charges. Prison time. So you want to take the house where I live, where I've lived for years taking care of our parents while you were off doing God knows what, and sell it to cover your gambling debts?" I asked, incredulous. "Investment losses," Chloe corrected primly. "And yes, we have a legal right to our half of the inheritance. You can either agree to sell, or we'll force the issue in court. And trust me, Sarah, we have lawyers who will make your life hell." Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between me and them. "This is Mom's home. She's lived here for years, taking care of our grandparents while you two were nowhere to be found. You don't get to swoop in now and take what's hers." Chloe's eyes flashed dangerously. "Mom?" she repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "He calls you Mom? That's rich. Listen to yourself, Ethan. You're not really family. You're just some sick kid I dumped here because I couldn't handle watching you die. Sarah took you in out of pity, out of some misguided sense of duty. Don't fool yourself into thinking you belong here." The words hung in the air like poison. I saw Ethan flinch, saw the pain flash across his face before he locked it down behind that professional mask he wore at the hospital. Something in me snapped. This woman who'd abandoned her child, who'd let him suffer, who'd missed every milestone of his life, had no right to hurt him now. "Get out," I said. My voice was shaking with rage, but it was loud. "Get out of this house right now." Chloe smiled, cold and triumphant. "We'll leave. But this isn't over, Sarah. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. Enjoy your little house while you can, because soon it'll be sold and you'll have nothing. Maybe then you'll understand what real loss feels like." "I understand loss better than you ever will," I said quietly. "I lost my sister the night she abandoned her dying child. I lost any respect I had for her long before that. You two are strangers to me. Strangers with a legal claim, maybe, but strangers nonetheless." Marcus gathered up the papers, sliding them back into his folder. "You have 1 week to respond to our offer. After that, we file suit. We're offering to buy you out for $500,000. That's generous considering we'll have to sell the house as is, and frankly, it's looking pretty rough." "$500,000? I repeated. For a house worth 1.8 million, that's not even close to half. It's what we're offering, Chloe said with a shrug. Take it or face us in court. Your choice. They left in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely concealed threats. I stood in the entryway, shaking, unable to process what had just happened. Ethan put his arm around me, and I leaned into him, this boy I'd raised, this man I was so proud of. We'll fight this, he said quietly. I have savings, we'll get a lawyer, we'll figure this out. But I knew, with a sick certainty, that this was just the beginning. Chloe and Marcus hadn't come back after 15 years of silence just to make a reasonable request. They'd come to take everything, and they wouldn't stop until they got it. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything my parents had built, everything they'd left for me to protect. This house held every memory I had of them, every moment of my childhood, every family dinner and holiday celebration. The thought of strangers living here, of developers tearing it down to build condos or McMansions, made me physically ill. In the morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years and made an appointment with David Peterson, our family's longtime attorney. He'd handled my parents' estate, had known them for over 30 years. Surely he would help us, would find a way to protect what was mine. Mr. Peterson's office was in an old building downtown, the kind with creaky wooden floors and frosted glass doors with names painted in gold lettering. His secretary, a woman in her 60s who'd worked for him since before I was born, greeted me warmly and ushered me into his office. David Peterson was 72 years old, white-haired and dignified in a 3-piece suit that had gone out of style decades ago. He'd been at my parents' funeral, had hugged me and told me how sorry he was. He'd seemed genuine then. Now, as I sat across from his massive oak desk and explained what Chloe was demanding, his expression remained carefully neutral. I see, he said when I finished. He pulled my parents' will from a filing cabinet, spread it on his desk, and studied it for a long moment. I'm afraid the will is very clear, Sarah. Your parents left everything equally to both daughters. There are no conditions, no requirements about involvement in their care or presence at their funeral. It's a straightforward 50-50 split. But that's not fair, I protested. I was here. I took care of them. Chloe hasn't contacted them in 15 years. Doesn't that matter? Morally? Perhaps. Legally? No. He steepled his fingers, looking at me over his reading glasses. The will is ironclad. If Chloe wants to force a sale, she can. And based on what you've told me, a court would likely side with her. What are my options? He sighed. You could buy out her share. Based on the current market value, that would be approximately $1 million. I almost laughed. $1 million. I was still paying off medical debt from Ethan's treatment. My teacher's salary was $58,000 a year. Ethan was a resident, making decent money, but drowning in student loans despite his scholarship. We could never raise that kind of money. Or? I prompted, knowing there had to be another option, hoping for something, anything. Or you could agree to sell the house and split the proceeds. That would be the cleanest solution, honestly. You'd walk away with over $1 million after taxes and fees. You could buy a smaller house, pay off your debts, start fresh. This is my home, I whispered, my voice breaking. I grew up here. My parents died here. Ethan recovered from cancer here. This house is full of every memory I have. It's all I have left of them. I understand, Sarah. I really do. But sometimes we have to make hard choices. Fighting Chloe in court would be expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately futile. The will is clear. She has a legal right to her inheritance. I left his office feeling hollow, defeated. That evening, I sat Ethan down and explained everything Mr. Peterson had said. His face grew darker with each word. Something's not right, he said finally, his brow furrowed. Mr. Peterson has known your family for decades. He was at your parents' funeral. He should be fighting for you, not discouraging you from even trying. He's just being realistic, I said, but doubt was creeping in. No, Ethan said firmly. A good lawyer would be exploring every possible angle, every loophole, every way to delay or prevent this sale. He gave up before he even started. Why? I didn't have an answer, but Ethan was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. I'm calling Jessica Lee. Remember her from my pre-med days at Duke? We were in organic chemistry together. She decided to go to law school instead of med school. She's young, but she's sharp as hell and she doesn't quit. Jessica came to our house that Saturday morning. She was 28, dressed in a crisp navy suit, her long black hair pulled back in a professional bun. She carried a leather briefcase and a laptop, and her eyes were intelligent and assessing as Ethan introduced us. "Ethan told me some of what's going on," she said, settling at our kitchen table and pulling out her laptop. "But I want to hear the whole story from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." I told her everything. About finding Ethan on my doorstep, about the 15 years of medical bills and sacrifice, about Chloe's 15 years of silence, about my parents' deaths and the will and Chloe's sudden reappearance. Jessica listened intently, taking notes on her laptop, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat back, her expression thoughtful. "Okay, first things first. I want to see all the documentation. The will, any correspondence with Chloe and Marcus, records of their contact or lack thereof over the past 15 years. Everything." We spent the next 3 hours going through boxes of papers, old letters, bank statements, anything that might be relevant. Jessica photographed everything with her phone, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she made notes. "I need to do some research," she said finally, packing up her laptop. "But I want to check something first. Do you mind if I look into Mr. Peterson's recent financial transactions? I know it sounds paranoid, but something about his immediate capitulation bothers me." "You think he's hiding something?" I asked. "I think it's worth checking," she said carefully. "Lawyers who've known a family for decades don't usually roll over this easily, especially when there are clear equity arguments to be made. Give me a few days." Those few days felt like years. I went to work, taught my classes, came home to an empty house that suddenly felt threatening instead of safe. Every time I looked at the garden, at the worn spot on the kitchen floor where my mother used to stand while cooking, at the pencil marks on the doorframe tracking my height as a child and later Ethan's, I felt sick with the possibility of losing it all. Jessica called on Thursday evening. "Can you and Ethan come to my office tomorrow morning? I found something." We sat in her small office in a building on the east side of town, cramped but professional, and watched as she pulled up documents on her computer screen. "I ran a financial background check on David Peterson," she said, turning her monitor so we could see. 3 days before you went to see him, he received a wire transfer of $50,000 from an account belonging to Marcus Thorne." I stared at the bank statement on the screen, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. "He took a bribe?" "It looks that way." I did some more digging. Peterson has significant gambling debts. He's been betting on horse races, sports, online poker. He's in deep to some very unpleasant people. Marcus didn't just bribe him. He probably threatened to expose the gambling debts if Peterson didn't cooperate. Ethan's jaw tightened. So every piece of advice he gave Mom was designed to make her give up without a fight. "Exactly," Jessica said. "He told you the will was ironclad, that fighting was futile, that you should just sell and move on. All of that benefits Chloe and Marcus, not you." A real advocate would have explored abandonment arguments, caretaker rights, undue influence, a dozen different angles. "What do we do?" I asked. Jessica's smile was sharp, almost predatory. "First, we confront Peterson. Then, we fire him and I take over your case. And then we make Chloe and Marcus very, very sorry they came back." The confrontation with David Peterson happened in his office that same afternoon. Jessica had called ahead, telling his secretary it was urgent. When we walked in, Peterson's face went pale. He knew why we were there. "Sarah, I can explain," he started, but Jessica cut him off. "Save it," she said, slapping a printout of the bank transfer on his desk. $50,000 from Marcus Thorne, 3 days before you advised my client to give up without a fight. That's bribery, Mr. Peterson. That's a violation of your fiduciary duty and your ethical obligations as an attorney. I could report you to the state bar. You'd be disbarred." Peterson's hands shook as he picked up the paper. "They threatened me," he said, his voice cracking. "I have debts, bad debts. Marcus said if I didn't help them, he'd make sure everyone knew. My wife, my partners, everyone. I'd lose everything. So you threw me under the bus instead," I said, my voice cold. "You were at my parents' funeral, David. You hugged me. You told me how sorry you were. And 3 days later, you took money to betray me." "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears running down his lined face. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I was weak. I was scared." "You're fired," I said, standing up. "Jessica will be representing me from now on. And if you breathe a word of our legal strategy to Chloe or Marcus, I'll make sure every bar association in the country knows what you did." We left him sitting at his desk, his face in his hands, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. One betrayal dealt with, but the larger battle was just beginning. Jessica filed a response to Chloe's demand, refusing the buyout offer and stating our intention to contest the forced sale. 2 days later, I was served with a lawsuit. Chloe and Marcus were suing for immediate partition and sale of the property, but it was worse than just a property dispute. The complaint alleged that I was mentally unstable following my parents' deaths, unable to properly manage the estate. Attached was a letter on official letterhead from Dr. Raymond Chen, a psychologist, stating that he'd been treating me for severe depression and recommending that I be removed from any decision-making regarding the estate. I stared at the letter in shock. "I've never even met this person," I said to Jessica. "I've never been to therapy. This is completely fabricated." Jessica's expression was grim as she studied the letter. "It's a fake, but it's a good one. The letterhead looks legitimate. The language is professional. If we don't challenge this aggressively, it could do serious damage. How do we fight it?" "We prove you've never been his patient. I'll subpoena his records. We'll expose this for the fraud it is. But Sarah, this is going to get ugly. They're not playing around." She was right. Within a week, rumors started spreading. I didn't know how, but somehow word got out at the school where I taught. Parents started calling the principal, expressing concern about my mental state. Was it appropriate for someone who was unstable to be teaching their children? I first learned about it when Principal Rodriguez called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon. Her expression was troubled as she gestured for me to sit. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me," she said. "Are you currently undergoing treatment for depression or any other mental health condition?" "What? No. Where is this coming from?" She slid a printout across her desk. It was an email from a parent, forwarding what appeared to be a screenshot of the psychologist's letter from the lawsuit. The parent was demanding that I be removed from teaching until my mental health could be verified. "How did they get this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "This is a legal document. It's part of a private lawsuit." "I don't know," Rodriguez said, "but I've received 17 similar emails in the past 3 days. Sarah, I want to believe you, but I have to think about the children and their parents' concerns. I'm going to have to put you on administrative leave while we investigate." "This is a lie," I said desperately. "My sister is suing me for my parents' house. She fabricated this letter to make me look incompetent. I've never been to therapy. I've never met this Dr. Chen person." "Then prove it," Rodriguez said gently. "Bring me documentation, medical records, a statement from Dr. Chen, something that clears this up. Until then, my hands are tied." I walked out of that school feeling like my entire life was collapsing. In less than 3 weeks, Chloe and Marcus had destroyed my reputation, threatened my home, and now cost me my income. I went home and sat in the dark living room, unable to even cry. That's where Ethan found me hours later, still sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. He sat next to me, and I finally broke down, sobbing into his shoulder while he held me. "They're going to take everything," I choked out. "The house, my job, my dignity, they're going to win." "No," Ethan said, his voice hard with determination. "They're not. You spent 15 years saving my life, Mom. You sacrificed everything for me. You fought when everyone said it was hopeless. You never gave up on me. Now it's my turn. I'm going to fight for you, and I'm not going to stop until they pay for what they've done." "How?" I asked hopelessly. "We don't have their money, their lawyers, their willingness to lie and cheat." "We have something better," Ethan said. "We have the truth. And desperate people make mistakes, Mom. Chloe and Marcus are desperate for money. That desperation will make them sloppy, make them overconfident. We just need to be patient and wait for them to slip up." Over the next few days, Jessica worked tirelessly to expose the fake psychological evaluation. She contacted Dr. Chen directly, and it turned out he was a real psychologist. But he'd never treated me and had never written that letter. Someone had stolen his letterhead and forged his signature. He was furious and immediately filed a complaint with the police for identity theft and fraud. But the damage was done. Even with Dr. Chen's statement that the letter was fake, the rumors had spread. Some parents still didn't trust me around their children. The school board launched a formal investigation that would take weeks. Meanwhile, Chloe and Marcus were pressuring me through their lawyers. Daily emails demanding that I accept their buyout offer. Threats that if I didn't settle, they'd make sure I lost everything in court. They were confident, aggressive, certain they held all the cards. Then came the fire. I woke up at 2:15 on a Thursday morning to the acrid smell of smoke. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard the distinctive crackle of flames and saw an orange glow through my bedroom window. I threw off the covers and ran to Ethan's room, shaking him awake. "Fire!" I gasped. "The house is on fire." We stumbled out of our rooms, and I could see flames through the kitchen window, bright and hungry against the darkness. The storage shed in the backyard was completely engulfed, and the fire was spreading to the back of the house, climbing the wooden siding like a living thing. Ethan grabbed me and pulled me toward the front door. "We have to get out, now." We ran outside in our pajamas, our feet bare on the cold grass. I fumbled for my phone, called 911 with shaking hands, while we stood in the front yard and watched our home burn. Neighbors started emerging from their houses, their faces shocked and concerned. Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down brought us blankets and insisted we sit on her porch while we waited for the fire department. The firefighters arrived within 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. They worked quickly, efficiently, containing the fire before it could spread to the main structure, but the damage was extensive. The entire storage shed was gone, reduced to a pile of charred wood and ash. The back of the house, including the kitchen and part of the living room, was badly burned. The acrid smell of smoke and melted plastic filled the air. The fire marshal arrived as the sun was coming up. He walked around the property, taking photographs, making notes. After about an hour, he came to where Ethan and I were sitting on Mrs. Chen's porch, wrapped in blankets and still in shock. "This was arson," he said bluntly. "Someone poured gasoline along the back wall of the shed in the house, then lit it. We found the accelerant residue. This was deliberate." "Who would do this?" I asked, though I already knew. I knew with a bone-deep certainty. "That's for the police to investigate," the fire marshal said. "But I wanted you to know this wasn't an accident. Someone tried to burn your house down." Chloe and Marcus showed up around 9 in the morning, while I was still standing in my backyard, looking at the charred remains of the shed where my father had kept his tools, where I'd stored boxes of family photos and Christmas decorations and all the accumulated memories of a lifetime. "Oh my God," Chloe said. But I saw the gleam in her eyes. She wasn't horrified. She was pleased. "This is terrible, Sarah. The house is practically destroyed now." Marcus walked around, assessing the damage with the cold calculation of someone evaluating an asset. "The structure looks compromised. This is going to tank the property value. You're probably looking at a loss of $4, maybe $500,000. "How convenient for you," Ethan said coldly. Chloe turned to him, her expression innocent. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means this fire benefits you and Marcus perfectly. The house is worth less, which means you can force a sale for less money, which is all you care about anyway." "That's a serious accusation," Marcus said, but his smile was smug. "Are you suggesting we had something to do with this? We were in our hotel all night. We have alibis." "I'm sure you do," Ethan said, "but arsonists rarely light their own fires. They hire people to do it for them." "You're paranoid," Chloe said dismissively. She turned to me, and her voice took on a false note of sympathy. "Sarah, this is a sign. The universe is telling you it's time to let go. Sell the house, take what you can get, and move on. Fighting this is only going to make things worse." "Get off my property," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Both of you, now." They left, but not before Marcus made one more comment. "You should really think about our offer, Sarah. Probably best to sell to a developer as is. I actually know someone who might take it off your hands cheap. Get this whole mess over with quickly." After they were gone, Ethan started walking the neighborhood. "Someone had to see something," he muttered. "Arsonists don't just materialize out of thin air." He was methodical, knocking on every door within a 3-block radius, asking if anyone had security cameras, if anyone had seen anything unusual the night of the fire. Most people hadn't, but Mrs. Chen, our elderly neighbor 3 doors down, had something interesting to show us. "I installed this camera after we had those package thefts last year," she explained, leading us to her computer. "It faces the street, records everything. Let me pull up that night." We crowded around her computer screen, watching the grainy black and white footage. At 1:47 a.m., a dark sedan pulled up across from our house. A man got out, looked around nervously, then walked toward our house, carrying what was clearly a gas can. 23 minutes later, he returned without the gas can, got back in the car, and drove away. "Can you zoom in on the license plate?" Ethan asked. "Mrs. Chen clicked a few buttons, and the image enlarged. The license plate was clearly visible. "I'm sending this to Detective Ramirez right now," Ethan said, pulling out his phone. Detective Ramirez was the investigator assigned to the arson case. Within 2 days, he'd tracked down the car and its owner. The man's name was Tony Marsh, a local thug with a record for assault, extortion, and a previous arson charge that hadn't stuck due to lack of evidence. But having a suspect and proving who hired him were two different things. Ramirez needed more. Ethan, thinking like the methodical scientist he'd trained to be, suggested they follow the money. Jessica, working with a private investigator she trusted, dug into Marcus's financial records. It took a week and some creative maneuvering that Jessica assured me was legal but borderline, but they found it. A cash withdrawal of $5,000 from Marcus's business account, made 3 days before the fire. And 2 days after the fire, Tony Marsh had deposited $4,500 in cash into his bank account. It's circumstantial, Jessica said, spreading the bank statements across her desk. But it's damning. Marcus withdrew cash right before the fire. Tony Marsh deposited almost the same amount right after. Combined with the video evidence, we have a strong case. But can we prove Marcus hired him? I asked. Not yet, Jessica admitted. Tony's not going to confess unless we give him a reason to. And Marcus will claim the cash withdrawal was for something else entirely. We need more. We need them to make a mistake. Or we need them to confess, Ethan said slowly. Jessica and I both looked at him. How do we get them to do that? I asked. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through possibilities. They think they're winning, he said finally. They think the fire destroyed any chance we had of keeping the house. They're confident, maybe even arrogant. Confident people brag, especially when they think they're safe. What are you thinking? Jessica asked. I'm thinking we make them feel like they've won completely, Ethan said. We give them exactly what they want, or at least, we make them think we're giving it to them. The plan they came up with was risky, maybe even crazy, but I was desperate enough to try anything. That evening, I called Chloe from my cell phone, my voice defeated and broken. You win, I told her, letting my voice crack. I can't do this anymore. The fire, the investigation at work, the legal fees, it's too much. I'll sign the papers. I'll sell the house. I just want this to be over. There was a pause, and then I heard the triumph in Chloe's voice. Finally. I knew you'd see reason eventually. This is the smart choice, Sarah. You'll thank me later. I doubt that, I said quietly. But I'm too tired to fight anymore. When do you want to meet? Tomorrow, Chloe said quickly, as if she was afraid I'd change my mind. Come to the real estate office at 10. We'll get everything signed and settled. Fine, I said, and hung up, but before that meeting there would be tonight. Through Jessica's investigator, we'd learned that Chloe and Marcus were planning a celebration dinner at the Sterling Room, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. They'd made reservations for 7 p.m., for themselves and their new lawyer, a slick corporate attorney named Richard Vance who'd replaced their previous counsel. Ethan came to me that evening with a plan so audacious, I thought he was joking at first. I'm going to work there tonight, he said. As a server. What? Ethan, that's insane. Listen, he said, sitting next to me on the couch. The restaurant manager owes Jessica a favor from a case she handled. She can get me in for the night as temporary staff. I'll be wearing a server's uniform. They won't recognize me. And I'll be wearing a recording device. People say things when they think they've won, Mom. Especially when they've been drinking expensive champagne. They'll celebrate, they'll toast their victory, and they'll talk about how they pulled it off. This is dangerous, I said. If they recognize you? They won't, Ethan interrupted. They've seen me exactly once, for maybe 5 minutes, and I was in scrubs. In a server's uniform with my hair slicked back, I'll look completely different. And Mom, this might be our only chance to get them to confess on record. I wanted to say no. Every protective instinct I had screamed at me to keep him far away from Chloe and Marcus. But I looked at this man who'd survived impossible odds, who'd fought his way back from death, who'd become someone who saved lives because he understood how precious life was. And I knew I couldn't protect him from everything. Be careful, I whispered. Always, he said, and kissed my forehead. That night was the longest of my life. I sat at home, my phone clutched in my hand, while Ethan went to work at the Sterling Room. Jessica had equipped him with a recording device so small and sophisticated it was virtually undetectable, hidden in a shirt button. If security found it, he'd be thrown out. If Chloe and Marcus recognized him, they'd clam up. Everything depended on them being too arrogant, too confident, too drunk on their perceived victory to be careful. My phone buzzed at 7:15 p.m., a text from Ethan. They're here. just sat down at table 12. They ordered a bottle of champagne, Dom Perignon, $800. I paced the living room, unable to sit still. Another text at 7:45. They're on their second bottle. Getting loud. Lots of laughter. At 8:30. Ordered dinner. Discussing the house sale. Very confident. At 9:15. Lawyer left. It's just the two of them now. Drinking heavily. The waiting was torture. I imagined 1,000 things going wrong. Ethan being recognized. The recording device failing. Chloe and Marcus being too smart to say anything incriminating. At 10:47 p.m., my phone rang. Ethan's voice was tight, controlled, barely containing excitement. I'm leaving now. I got it. I got everything. I'm coming home. He walked through the door at 11:15, still wearing the white shirt and black pants of a server, his hair slicked back with gel. His face was pale, but his eyes were blazing with righteous fury. Jessica was right behind him. She'd been waiting in her car nearby. Play it, he said, handing the tiny recording device to Jessica. She plugged it into her laptop, and we gathered around the kitchen table to listen. At first, it was just restaurant noise, the clink of silverware on plates, murmured conversations from other tables, soft music playing in the background. Then Chloe's voice, loud and slightly slurred. God, I can't believe she actually gave up. Sarah was always weak, even as kids. No spine whatsoever. Marcus laughed, the sound ugly and cruel. The fire helped. That was brilliant, by the way. Dropped the property value by at least 600 grand. We'll sell it fast to that developer, I know. Pay off our debts, and never have to see this miserable town again. My hands clenched into fists. Hearing them talk so casually about burning my home, about manipulating me, about destroying my life, made me want to scream. But the recording continued. Chloe's voice again, vicious with satisfaction. The best part is that Sarah wasted 15 years on my kid. 15 years, can you imagine? All that time, all that money, all that effort on a brat who wasn't even hers. She could have had a real life, traveled, met someone, but she threw it all away on a dying child. And for what? So he could become some mediocre doctor? It's pathetic. I heard Ethan's sharp intake of breath beside me. Jessica put a hand on his arm, steadying him. Marcus's voice, even more slurred now. Remember when you wanted to just dump him at a fire station, but you said leaving him with Sarah was better? It was better, Chloe agreed. Keep her busy with a sick kid so she wouldn't ask questions about the money we took from Dad's business. That worked out perfectly. 70 grand, and the old man never even noticed it was missing. Probably thought he'd miscalculated his books. Jessica and I exchanged shocked looks. They'd stolen from my father? The recording continued, Chloe and Marcus's voices getting louder, more reckless as the alcohol loosened their tongues. They bragged about their schemes, their manipulations, how they'd always planned to come back and claim their inheritance once my parents were dead. Then Marcus said something that made all three of us freeze. At least we handled Martin better this time. There was a pause, then a new voice, probably someone at a nearby table. Who's Martin? Martin Hughes, Marcus said, his voice dropping but still clearly audible. Guy who worked for our startup. Found out we were cooking the books, threatened to report us to the SEC. I couldn't let that happen. Paid a guy 15 grand to cut his brake lines. Made it look like an accident. His wife even got the insurance payout. Probably thanked us for it. The sound of something hitting the floor, maybe a fork or a glass. Chloe's voice, sharp with panic. Marcus! Shut up! What the hell is wrong with you? What? No one's listening. We won. Sarah signed away everything. We're free and clear. You just admitted to murder, you idiot. To who? Some random people at dinner? Relax, Chloe. No one cares. No one's ever going to know. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, capturing Chloe's increasingly frantic attempts to get Marcus to stop talking, and Marcus's drunken insistence that they were untouchable. Eventually, they paid their bill and left, still arguing. Ethan had stopped the recording then, slipped out through the kitchen, and driven straight home. Now we sat in silence, processing what we'd just heard. They'd confessed to arson, to theft from my father, to murder. This is more than enough, Jessica said, finally, her voice shaking slightly. This is conspiracy to commit arson, fraud, embezzlement, and an admission of murder. I'm calling Detective Ramirez right now. She pulled out her phone and stepped into the living room. I could hear her low voice explaining what we had, the excitement barely contained in her tone. Ethan sat next to me, and I put my arm around him. You were so brave, I whispered. I wasn't brave, he said quietly. I was furious. Listening to her talk about you like that, about how you wasted your life on me, Mom, you didn't waste anything. You saved me. You gave me everything. I know, sweetheart, and she's wrong. She's always been wrong. Jessica came back into the kitchen, her eyes bright. Ramirez is bringing in the FBI. Martin Hughes's death was investigated as an accident 2 years ago, but they can reopen it as a murder investigation based on this confession. He's getting warrants for Chloe and Marcus's arrest right now. They're going to pick them up tonight. Tonight? I asked. They're worried if we wait until tomorrow's meeting, Chloe and Marcus might run. With this kind of money at stake and a murder confession on tape, they're flight risks. Ramirez wants them in custody immediately. We stayed up all night, unable to sleep, adrenaline and anxiety keeping us wired. At 3:27 a.m., Detective Ramirez called Jessica. We have them, he said, and Jessica put him on speaker so we could all hear. Pick them up at their hotel. Marcus tried to flush his phone down the toilet. Chloe tried to claim diplomatic immunity, said she was a Canadian citizen. Neither worked. They're being processed now. What happens next? Jessica asked. They'll be arraigned in the morning. Federal charges for the murder conspiracy, state charges for the arson and fraud. With that recording and the evidence we've gathered, the DA says this is the most slam-dunk case she's seen in years. These two are going away for a long time. Crass. After Ramirez hung up, the three of us just sat there in the kitchen, watching the sun come up through the window. It felt surreal, like the ending of a nightmare I couldn't quite believe was over. We still have the meeting at the real estate office this morning, I said. Jessica smiled, and it was sharp and satisfied. Oh, we're still going to that meeting. I wouldn't miss it for the world. We arrived at the real estate office at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. The office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. The receptionist offered us coffee, which we declined, and showed us into a conference room with a long polished table and leather chairs. Jessica sat next to me, her briefcase on the table, looking every inch the competent attorney. Ethan sat on my other side, his presence a solid comfort. We waited in silence, the tension building. At exactly 10 a.m., the door opened. But instead of Chloe and Marcus, Detective Ramirez walked in, followed by 2 FBI agents in dark suits. The real estate agent, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Chen, looked confused. I'm sorry, but we're expecting clients for a closing. This is a private meeting. Not anymore, one of the FBI agents said, showing his badge. We need this room. At 10:03, Chloe and Marcus walked in, all smiles and barely contained glee. Chloe was carrying the contract papers in a leather folder. Marcus had a pen ready. They both stopped dead when they saw the law enforcement. The color drained from Chloe's face. Marcus actually stumbled backward, nearly falling. What's going on? Chloe demanded, but her voice was shaking. The FBI agent stepped forward. Chloe Miller and Marcus Thorne, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Martin Hughes, conspiracy to commit arson, wire fraud, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. This is insane, Marcus stammered. We haven't done anything. You can't prove anything. We have a full confession, Detective Ramirez said. Recorded last night at the Sterling Room, you confessed to hiring someone to kill Martin Hughes. You confessed to committing arson on this woman's property. You confessed to stealing $70,000 from her deceased father. It's all on tape, every word. Chloe's eyes darted around the room wildly, and they landed on Ethan. Recognition dawned slowly, her mouth falling open. You, she breathed. You were there. You were our server. Ethan stood up, and his voice was cold as ice. The child you abandoned, the child you called a waste of 15 years, the child whose illness you couldn't be bothered to deal with, he served you champagne last night. He listened while you bragged about destroying his mother's life. He recorded every single word while you confessed to your crimes. No, Chloe whispered. No, that's entrapment. That's illegal. You can't use that. Actually, we can, Jessica said, standing up. California is a 2-party consent state, but there's an exception for recording conversations where criminal activity is being discussed. Your confession to murder and arson falls under that exception. The recording is completely admissible in court. Marcus lunged forward, not toward the agents but toward Ethan, his face twisted with rage. You little bastard! Your mother ruined everything! You should have died 15 years ago like you were supposed to. 2 agents grabbed him before he could reach Ethan. They forced his arms behind his back, snapping handcuffs on his wrists. He was still shouting, spewing venom, as they dragged him toward the door. Chloe turned to me, and I saw tears running down her perfectly made-up face, mascara streaking. "Sarah, please. I'm your sister. You can't do this to me. Think about family." I stood up slowly, walked over to where she stood between the two FBI agents, and looked her directly in the eyes. "You stopped being my sister the night you left your dying child on my doorstep," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You stopped being family when you chose money over your own son's life. You stopped being anything to me when you tried to burn down my home. What happens to you now is justice, Chloe, and it's long overdue." She opened her mouth to respond, but one of the agents cut her off. "Ma'am, you need to come with us now." They led her away in handcuffs, her designer heels clicking on the polished floor, her perfectly styled hair beginning to come undone. Marcus was already in the hallway, still shouting about lawyers and false arrests and police brutality. Patricia Chen, the real estate agent, stood in the corner looking shell-shocked. "I've been doing this for 23 years, she said faintly. "I've never had a closing turn into an arrest before." Jessica smiled. "There's a first time for everything." The trial took 6 months to get to court, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The prosecution had the recording, which was devastating. They had Tony Marsh, who'd been picked up in Nevada and immediately agreed to testify against Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence. They had the financial records showing the cash withdrawals and deposits. They had the video from Mrs. Chen's security camera. They had Dr. Chen's testimony about the forged letter. And they had the reopened investigation into Martin Hughes's death. When detectives went back and examined his car with new eyes, they found evidence the brake lines had been deliberately cut. Martin's widow, who'd always suspected his death wasn't an accident, testified about threatening phone calls Martin had received from Marcus in the weeks before he died. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Marcus Thorne was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, arson, fraud, and embezzlement. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 15. Chloe Miller was found guilty as an accessory to murder, arson, and fraud. The jury believed she'd known about the murder even if she hadn't participated directly, and that she'd been an active participant in the arson and fraud schemes. She was sentenced to 18 years. I sat in that courtroom with Ethan beside me, holding his hand, and watched as they were led away in orange jumpsuits. Chloe looked back at me once, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been regret. Or maybe just regret that she'd been caught. I would never know, and I found I didn't care. The judge also ruled on the civil case. Chloe, by virtue of her criminal activity, had forfeited any right to her inheritance. Everything, the house, the savings, the investments, all of it was awarded to me. The court also ordered Chloe and Marcus to pay restitution for the fire damage, though the judge acknowledged I was unlikely to ever see that money. Outside the courthouse, Jessica hugged me tight. "It's over," she said. "You won." "We won," I corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you and Ethan." "That's what family does," she said with a smile. "We fight for each other." The next few months were a blur of reconstruction and recovery. I used part of my inheritance to restore the house, hiring contractors who rebuilt the kitchen bigger and better than before, who repaired all the damage, and even upgraded things that had been falling apart for years. The house that had nearly been destroyed became more beautiful than it had been in decades. I was reinstated at the school with a formal apology from the district and a raise. The superintendent personally apologized for not supporting me more during the investigation. My colleagues threw me a welcome back party that had me crying happy tears. Ethan went back to work at County General and within a year was promoted to head of the pediatric oncology department. He was barely 22. The youngest department head in the hospital's history, but his brilliance and his compassion made him the obvious choice. He established the Hayes Foundation for Childhood Cancer Research, using part of his inheritance. My parents had left a small trust fund that now went to him, to fund research into new treatments. Within 2 years, the foundation was funding 6 different research projects and had helped over 100 families with medical expenses. But the most meaningful change came on a sunny afternoon in April, when Ethan appeared in my classroom after school, holding a manila folder. "What's this?" I asked, looking up from the papers I was grading. "Legal documents," he said, sitting on the edge of my desk. "I want you to adopt me. Officially. Legally. Not because I need a mother, I've had one for 15 years, but because you deserve to be recognized as mine in every possible way. No more questions about our relationship, no more explaining to people. I want it on paper, permanent and legal, that you're my mother. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were adoption papers, already partially filled out, just waiting for my signature and a judge's approval. Ethan, I whispered, tears blurring my vision. You're 20 years old. You don't need to be adopted. I know I don't need to be, he said gently. I want to be. Mom, you saved my life. You gave me everything. You loved me when my own biological mother threw me away. You're my mother in every way that matters. I just want to make it official. I signed the papers through my tears, my hand shaking so badly the signature was barely legible. 2 weeks later, we stood in family court before Judge Margaret Williams, the same judge who'd presided over Chloe and Marcus's sentencing. She smiled as she reviewed the paperwork. It's rare that I get to see a case with such a clear demonstration of what family really means, she said. Sarah Miller, you took in a dying child who wasn't biologically yours and fought for 15 years to save him. Ethan Hayes, you've become a remarkable young man who saves other children from the same fate you faced. It's an honor to make this official. She signed the papers with a flourish. Congratulations, you are now legally mother and son. We celebrated with dinner at a nice restaurant, nothing as fancy as the Sterling Room, but warm and comfortable. Jessica joined us, along with some of Ethan's colleagues from the hospital and a few of my teacher friends. It felt like the beginning of something new, something hopeful. A year later, Ethan met Lily at the hospital. She was a pediatric nurse, 24 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle manner with the children. I could see why he fell for her. She reminded me of him, someone who'd chosen to dedicate her life to helping sick children, someone who understood that every child deserved a chance to fight. He brought her to dinner one Sunday evening, nervous in a way I'd never seen him before. I liked her immediately. She was genuine, sweet, and clearly head over heels for my son. When she asked me about Ethan's childhood, about his cancer and his recovery, I saw tears in her eyes. He's amazing, she said quietly. Every day I watch him with his patients, and I see how much he cares. He treats every child like they're the most important person in the world. Now I understand why. They got engaged 6 months later. Ethan asked my permission first, which made me cry happy tears. The wedding was small, held in our backyard under the big oak tree where my father had built a swing for me when I was 5. The garden was in full bloom, my mother's roses providing a fragrant backdrop. It was simple and beautiful and exactly right. Watching Ethan and Lily exchange vows, I thought about the night he'd arrived on my doorstep, a dying child abandoned by his mother. I thought about the years of struggle, the fear, the debt, the exhaustion, and I thought about how all of it, every single moment of pain and sacrifice, had led to this. To watching my son marry a woman who loved him, to seeing him happy and healthy and thriving. The following spring, Lily came to me with news that made my heart soar. She was pregnant. They'd found out just that morning, and Ethan was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure. What if I'm like her? He asked me that night, sitting on the porch while Lily slept inside. What if I have some genetic predisposition to be a terrible parent? You won't be, I said firmly. You're nothing like Chloe, Ethan. You're kind, compassionate, selfless. You'll be an amazing father. How do you know? Because I raised you, I said, taking his hand. Because you learned from watching what love looks like, not abandonment. Because you've spent your entire adult life saving children. Your own child will be the luckiest kid in the world. Hope was born on a sunny afternoon in May, 9 pounds 2 ounces, with Ethan's dark eyes and Lily's sweet smile. When they placed her in my arms for the first time, I looked down at this tiny, perfect creature and felt my heart overflow. Hello, beautiful girl, I whispered. I'm your grandmother. The word felt strange and wonderful on my tongue. Grandmother. Me. The woman who'd thought she'd never have children, who'd spent 15 years raising someone else's abandoned son, was now a grandmother. Ethan watched me with hope, and I saw tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For showing me what family means, for teaching me how to love, for saving my life so I could have this moment. I looked at him, this brilliant, compassionate man, and then at the baby in my arms, and I thought about the family we'd built from the ashes of betrayal and abandonment. This was what Chloe had thrown away. This love, this joy, this connection. A year later, Lily was pregnant again, this time with a boy they would name James, after my father. Our family was growing, expanding, becoming something beautiful and whole. I thought about Chloe sometimes, locked away in federal prison in Pennsylvania. I wondered if she regretted her choices, if she thought about the grandson and granddaughter she would never know, the son she'd abandoned. I'd received one letter from her, about 2 years after her sentencing, forwarded through Jessica. I'd almost thrown it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short, written on prison stationery in Chloe's still elegant handwriting. She didn't apologize, not really. She blamed circumstances, bad luck, Marcus's influence. She asked if I would bring Ethan to visit her, if she could meet him one more time, explain herself. I wrote back a single sentence. You had your chance to be his mother 15 years ago. You chose to walk away. Live with that choice. I never heard from her again. Marcus, I learned through news reports, had tried to appeal his sentence twice. Both appeals were denied. He would spend the rest of his useful years behind bars, and I felt no sympathy for him. He'd murdered a man, tried to murder our future by burning our home. He deserved every day of his sentence. Now, on evenings like this, I sit on the porch and watch Ethan push Hope on the swing he installed in the big oak tree. She's 3 years old now, fearless and laughing, demanding he push her higher. James, 18 months old, toddles around the garden, investigating flowers and bugs with intense concentration. Lily sits beside me, knitting baby booties for the third child she's carrying, due in October. The house looks beautiful in the evening light. We'd finished the restoration years ago, modernizing while keeping the character that made it home. The kitchen is bright and updated, the living room cozy, the bedrooms comfortable. My mother's garden has been expanded, now including a vegetable patch where Hope helps me plant tomatoes each spring. Sometimes I think about that night 15 years ago, about the choice I made to open my door to a dying child. My life could have been so different. I could have called social services, let them handle it, gone back to my quiet, uncomplicated life. I would have had more money, less stress, more freedom. But I would have missed this. All of this. The joy of watching Ethan grow from a sick child into a remarkable man. The pride of seeing him save other children's lives. The overwhelming love I feel for my grandchildren. The family we built, stronger than biology, deeper than blood. Ethan looks back at me from the swing, Hope laughing in his arms, and he smiles. It's a smile full of joy, full of life, full of everything we fought for. I smile back, my heart so full it feels like it might burst. Chloe and Marcus tried to take everything from me. They tried to destroy my home, my reputation, my sense of safety. They thought money and cruelty and manipulation would win. They thought they could bulldoze over me and take what they wanted. But they forgot something crucial. They forgot that I'd already won the only battle that mattered. I'd won when I chose love over convenience. I'd won when I'd held Ethan's hand through chemotherapy. I'd won when I'd worked 3 jobs to pay his medical bills. I'd won every single time I chose to stay and fight instead of walking away. The sun sets behind the oak tree, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and deep purple. Hope's laughter rings out across the yard, pure and joyful. James discovers a butterfly and shrieks with delight. Lily hums softly beside me, her hands moving rhythmically with her knitting needles. This is what they could never understand. This is what they lost when they chose greed over love, cruelty over compassion, selfishness over sacrifice. Family isn't about biology or blood or legal documents, though those can be part of it. Family is about the people who stand by you when life is hardest. It's about sacrifice and love and choosing each other every single day. It's about building something together that's stronger than any individual, more valuable than any amount of money. I look at Ethan now, this brilliant, compassionate man who saves children's lives every day. I look at Hope and James, my beautiful grandchildren, who will grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally. I look at Lily, the daughter I never had but always wanted. I look at this house, this home filled with laughter and love, and rebuilt from ashes, both literal and metaphorical. This is my victory. This is my family. And no amount of money, no legal document, no amount of cruelty could ever take it away. Ethan calls to me, asking if I want to come push Hope with him. I stand up, my joints creaking slightly, 45 years old and feeling every bit of it after the years of stress and struggle. But I'm here. I'm healthy. I'm surrounded by love. I walk across the lawn to the swing, and Hope reaches for me with chubby arms. "Gamma!" she shouts, her word for grandma. I take over pushing while Ethan scoops up James, who's trying to eat a handful of dirt. The evening air is warm, carrying the scent of roses and lavender from the garden. Somewhere in the distance, I hear Mrs. Chen calling to her cats, the familiar sounds of our neighborhood settling in for the night. This is home. This is peace. This is everything that matters. And as I push my granddaughter on the swing my son built in the tree my father planted, I think about all the battles we fought and won. Against cancer, against debt, against cruelty and betrayal, against people who tried to destroy us. We won them all, not because we had money or power or connections, but because we had something infinitely more valuable. We had love, we had each other. We had the determination to build something good out of something terrible, to create family from abandonment, to find hope in despair. The sun dips below the horizon, and Lily calls from the porch that dinner is ready. We gather our small tribe, Ethan carrying James, me holding Hope's hand as she chatters about the butterfly she saw and the cookies she wants to make tomorrow. We walk into the house together, this family we built from nothing, from a single choice made on a rainy night 15 years ago. The lights inside are warm and welcoming, casting a golden glow across the porch. I look back one more time at the yard, at the garden in bloom, at the swing swaying gently in the evening breeze. This is what they tried to take from me. This peace, this home, this love. But they couldn't. They could never take what mattered most, because what mattered most was never something that could be stolen or burned or destroyed. It was built on a foundation of sacrifice and love, strengthened by every challenge we faced, made unbreakable by the bonds we forged. We step inside, and I close the door on the past, on the pain, on the people who chose darkness over light. Inside is everything I need, everything I fought for, everything I won. This is what they could never understand. This is what they lost when they chose greed over love, cruelty over compassion. This is everything that matters, and it's mine.